Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Tarrant County College Board of Trustees budget workshop. We have a quorum and appreciate everybody being here this afternoon. So I'll call the meeting to order, and the first order of business is the public comment. We do have one individual who has signed up to address the board, and that's Daniel J. Bennett. Mr. Bennett? Yes, sir. We'd be glad to hear from you at this time. You have 3 minutes.
Are you the keeper of the time, sir?
Slate.
Oh, it's on the board?
Yeah. At your leisure. It's your pleasure.
Testing. 19. I think earlier was 19 was the site. My name's Daniel Bennett. I live in White Settlement. I've come before the trustees before.
We'll start your time.
We'll do it. Oh, there we go. Heck yeah.
And we'll start your time over again.
You may have to turn it down a little bit. I'm kind of loud. All right.
Ease back a little bit. It'll be fine.
How's the volume here?
That's great.
That's good? Okay, thank you. Okay, my name is Daniel Bennett. I live in White Settlement. I've come before the trustees before. My main topic in life is Tarrant Appraisal District. And I've spoken to this body before about whom I think should be on that board. And back in November 18th of 2021, you all took a vote to cast ballots for Catherine Wildman and Jonas Jordan. You had 2 people here that night, Mayor of Lakeside, Texas, Mayor Jacobs, and a sitting secretary of the board itself, Mr. Diott. He encouraged you to give all your votes to Mr. Lasada. And I understand Judge Whitley's aspirations to have Ms. Wildman on that board. And I was disappointed that when Shannon Wood made the motion to give at least partial votes to Mr. Lasada and seconded by Ms. Morrison, that was voted down 2-4. And the motion to split the votes between Jungus and Wildman was done by your board. It was 4-2. So 2 people, I feel, used proper discernment, and the other 4 were guessing. Now, Mr. Barr made the motion, and I understand the reasoning. But for those of you who have not been following the appraisal district, which is, I guess, 4 of you out of 2, last meeting on the 30th, if you know anything about how many Open Meetings Act violations that TAD did, I have a list of them. I won't go through them all, but I want to talk about choosing candidates, because you wrote a piece, or at least put your name on a piece, Mr. Barr, with Mr. Moncrief in the paper in support of Dan Buman for the Water District. Well, I've been going to these meetings also. It's become another passion of mine. And I have realized that Dan Buman is not the guy. Now, at the last sentence in that piece, I believe, said, let's forget the past and let's move on to the future. It's hard to forget the past when the future's sitting in that chair. Now, I have a list of things that I believe Dan Buman has done incorrectly. But Ms. Wildman, I have 2 pages of things that she has done. I'm not going to say that she's not talented in some ways, sometime in the past, but she has outlived in terms of governing a body. These people on the 30th were treated like cattle. They weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. They weren't allowed to come into the building. People with medical conditions had to stand outside. People that fell into the ADA were not giving refuge. The women were told to go to the bathroom at the 7-Eleven. I could go on. The doors were locked. One gentleman fell in the lobby. They refused to help him up. He had to call 911. That man has 6 Grammy Awards. His name is Mr. Miller Jr., Jared Miller Jr. He owns one of the largest jazz recording studios in the country, and he was refused aid. I could go on. I'm requesting that this body, since you appointed Ms. Wildman there, it is your duty to not recall her, but ask her to resign. You cast 154 votes for Ms. Wildman against prudent judgment offered by myself, Mayor Jacob, and Rich Diott, Ms. Morrison, and Ms. Wood. I now ask this board to rectify this. Ask for her resignation by sending a letter to Ms. Wildman. Not asking for it, but demanding it. Anyway, I want to thank you for y'all's time. It's been quite pleasurable. There'll be some people here, I believe, in 2 days to give you more background on all the Open Meeting Act violations and how the voting public, the registered voters, were treated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Okay, our undertaking today is to do a review and meet with staff relative to the fiscal year 2022-23 proposed budget and the tax rate. And Ms. Susan Ellenase, our Chief Operating Officer, is going to lead that discussion. Susan, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here this afternoon as we walk through what you'll be taking action on in the coming weeks. I always like to start just with a reminder about the funds that you'll be adopting budgets for, just as a reminder. So, of course, Fund 10 is our main maintenance and operations budget. That's the bulk of where our resources go to run the college. It is supported by not only the O&M tax levy, so property taxes, but also tuition and other forms of income. We also have the Auxiliary Enterprises Fund, which is revenue from other sources, such as our bookstore, some of the pass-throughs of expenses that we have. We'll get into more detail of that in a minute. It's a smaller part of our operations. In addition, there's two capital budgets. There's the pay-as-you-go fund that's cash-funded projects that receives an annual transfer from the maintenance and operations tax levy to support the cash-funded capital projects. And in addition, we have Fund 90, which is our bond-funded capital. And of course, that's where we record the proceeds from our debt sales that we have to support the projects that are part of the bond program. We have two other budgets. One is the one that we just recently set up with the blessing of this board, which is to track and capture the funds apportioned to our enterprise resource program investment in our new anthology program that'll replace our student information system, our HR system, and our finance system. And then finally, the debt service fund, which is where we capture the tax levy for interest in sinking and pay our annual debt service. So in terms of the budget process, we go through a couple of things. Each year we ask all of the leadership across the college, so the cabinet members, to submit requests for funding, and anything they submit significant new funding requests that may reflect personnel, additional operating costs, program changes, those kinds of things, and we organize those and make decisions as a leadership team about what's funded, and then put those in the budget for your consideration. In addition, as you're aware, we've been working on 3G8P for a number of years, and so there's some nimbleness to the way that we've handled this in terms of some of the recommendations that have come forward to change and expand programs that we've funded throughout the year and will memorialize in this budget. You'll note that the last few years we've always had a strategic initiatives funding line to be able to allow that to occur throughout the year, and you'll see some of those changes memorialized as part of this budget. So the priorities that we identified from the beginning is that we knew that we were going to have new debt service because of the sale that we did in June of $400 million towards our bond program. So we've added about $28 million in our debt service. You may recall that our commitment to the voters was to maintain our overall tax rate and absorb that. When we started this bond program, we did not have any outstanding debt, and so it was we did not have a line item for debt service, and the plan was to incorporate the growth there. We also know that we've got to give some attention to a compensation plan to continue to deal with retention and recruitment. As I mentioned, we'll have operationalizing some of the 3G8P initiatives included the administrative foundation of making sure that HR and IT are properly resourced based on some of the discussions we've been having recently. And then in response to the board, there was a request for us to consider or to add resources to our marketing program, and so you can see that we've, as a placeholder, included $300,000 additional to take it to a total of $2.3 million. So one of the factors in our budget is obviously enrollment and how that translates into tuition. So we wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of how we're doing with enrollment at this point. And basically, this chart shows you at this point prior to the term on each of these dates, you can see how we track how many students are enrolled leading up on those same dates. And that allows us to see the pattern of their enrollment. You can see back in the fall of 2019, we were at 43,000 students. 2020, it fell down to 36 during the pandemic. You can see you're well aware of this, that we planned for the decrease in last year, but we've recovered at this point that we're up to 35,000 students as of, I'm sorry, the chart flipped, as of August the 8th. And so we're nearly where we were in the fall of 2020. So we're showing some good recovery based on the efforts of many people across the college to restore that enrollment number. So this is an overview of Fund 10, our main operating budget, and the significant changes, or I'll walk through each of the revenue categories. So of course we have our state appropriation, which is already set by the legislature, so that remains unchanged. In addition, we're proposing an increase of nearly $7 million in our maintenance tax. And this assumes maintaining the current tax rate, and it also assumes moving a penny over to our interest and sinking fund to cover that debt service that I mentioned a minute ago. I'll also note that we're seeing about a 20% increase in enrollment. We're increasing our proposed tuition total revenue, not rate, total revenue by about 10%, which is a conservative view of how that is, but we wanted to reflect some of the recovering tuition receipts that we would anticipate. We are recommending the same rate of $64 a credit hour as we've had the last 3 years. And then assume that as we recover our enrollment, that we'll probably have more robust conversations around that in the coming years. So in terms of our historic tax rate, you can see a 10-year history of where we are. One thing I'll talk to you about here is that you may recall that the state statute renamed the effective tax rate to the no new revenue tax rate a couple of years ago. And so we had the tax assessor collector run their calculation. We appoint them as our officer to run the calculations, and they establish what's called the no new revenue tax rate. And essentially that means for properties that were taxed last year, what rate would be applied to generate the same revenue from those properties this year. And so it excludes new development and new growth and that kind of thing, but they establish this rate, and it's just over 12 cents. One of the things that I'll mention, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, is that the board is, the only difference in terms of adopting this rate is the language that we will use in the notices to the public. So it's perfectly acceptable to adopt a rate over the no new revenue rate. We actually did that the year before last. One of the things I'll point out is that the 0.95 cents between our proposed rate and the no new revenue rate equates to about $25.41 per household per year. So we've been sort of an affordable line on the tax bill for a while now, and we've absorbed the $825 million program without an increase in our overall tax rate. So I think that we've worked to be good stewards there. So the new expenditures that we'll highlight for you is that we are recommending employee pay raises. We're estimating about $6.5 million. We've still got a little bit more work to do on running some scenarios about what that looks like. But we're proposing it in two parts, and it's for eligible employees, which means that they have to have been employed here by the end of May to be eligible for this increase. We're recommending a 3% adjustment for cabinet and class code 10, which is sort of the highest levels of our organization, and a 4% adjustment for all others. The reason we're recommending that differentiation is because by applying the same across the board to the entire organization for the number of years that we have, we've continued to sort of separate and stretch out our pay classification system, where at the highest level they're getting a little bit out of market, whereas at the lower ends of the pay range, a higher percentage is necessary to help deal with inflation and so on. So that's our recommendation at this point. The other thing that we are doing, and we've talked to you about this before, is that we just issued and closed an RFP for a comp and class study. And one of the things, we've been doing some of that work already that we'll talk about in a minute with our admin assistants and coordinators on campuses. But our intent is to set aside funding or have funding available as we work through that to continue making market and equity adjustments within those that are more targeted and tailored towards what's going on in the different classifications. Because it's been a while since we've actually applied that kind of a lens to our pay structure, and so we need to do some corrections there. So our intent is to have sufficient funding available for us to do that throughout the year and bring those recommendations to you as they are achieved. The other thing, I didn't mention this, the second bullet refers to, we have not adjusted the pay scales over the last couple of years based on the across-the-board rate increases. Because of some of the challenges in the market and hiring at this point, we do want to pull the bottom of the range up to be able to accommodate that. And so the salary schedule that we'll actually adopt this year will, the lowest wages will actually be increased to reflect those across-the-board increases that have happened over time. So other new expenditures include, and these are some of the focus areas that I mentioned already, is that we have formerly the CACO unit, and I keep forgetting what it stands for, Community Access. I always forget the A. And Community Outreach. We've actually renamed it to Student Recruitment and Outreach, recognizing that there's additional places besides the high schools, if they're properly resourced, that they can do outreach to employers that offer tuition assistance and may have a workforce that's near completion of a degree and that kind of thing. So we have added 12 positions there, and you see the relative cost of that. In addition, we have added district directors and campus directors for educational partnerships. Those programs are growing, and as you know, 20% of our enrollment is associated with some of those partnerships. And so it's important for us to have a structure in place to support and manage that. In terms of retention, one of the things that one of the 3GAP panels has been studying for several years is the advising and counseling and what the appropriate ratio of those positions to the number of students to ensure that they're getting into the classes that they need and getting proper guidance. It has needed some attention, so we're adding 31 full-time equivalent there across all the campuses. And then student affairs, we've actually added some leadership positions associated with that to make sure that the support systems in place for students receive appropriate leadership and guidance. Some other areas in instructional support, our Connect Campus has actually, with the growth that they've experienced, need to add some e-faculty coaches and instructional designers for the coursework that's taking place there. We've also, through 3GAP, been working on the Learning Commons model that, as you're aware, includes what we traditionally knew as libraries, but also some of the writing labs and other kinds of services, as well as supplemental instruction and so on, and putting it under the same leadership to make sure that those support services are in place. Each year we've been budgeting for academic equipment to the tune of about $1 million. We've increased that to $2 million based on requests from the campuses where we're trying to improve the experience for students there. Can range from anything from microscopes to some of the health science equipment, those kinds of things, welding equipment, you name it. It spans the gamut in terms of the kinds of equipment needed to teach students. And then finally, this year we expanded the Organizational Excellence and Development, formerly known as the Center for Teaching and Learning, by 7 positions to continue supporting and managing our faculty and staff and their needs to be able to perform effectively. The administrative positions, and we talked about this recently, we have added a net 11 positions to, added 11 positions to human resources. Part of it is we are moving the Title IX activities that were previously occurring with student conduct out on the campuses to HR. Title IX sort of spans employees and students, and getting that under singular leadership we think will be more effective. We also, based on the number of positions that we're trying to recruit for, are adding a recruiter and a talent acquisition coordinator. Employee relations continues to be an area where we've had to outsource a lot of the investigations and so on, just because of capacity, and so we're adding staff there. You'll note that we are including a manager of special projects for the comp and class study that I mentioned a minute ago, because we need somebody who is thinking about that all day, every day, to make sure that we can get that across the finish line. That's been a challenge in the past with some of the other studies that have been done, that we need somebody driving that to a conclusion. We had set aside in the current year budget money to get that done, and for a variety of reasons we had focused our energy just on sort of a subset of the personnel for comp and class. We've included that $400,000 for us to use next year or in 2023. And then finally, we did move out of HR professional development and moved it over to the new Organizational Excellence and Development Group, so that we've got a singular unit thinking about what the training and development needs of our entire workforce are, and under a singular leadership, and making sure that there's order there. We have recommended the addition of 5 positions for IT information management. This is part of the group. I think you've heard Bob talk about knowledge management and how we deal with making sure that we've captured policies, processes, artifacts of the work that we do, and help the different areas of the organization set up systems to be able to manage that. In addition, throughout COVID, we've increased the number of Laserfish repositories and electronic signatures and all those kinds of things that this team will help continue to embrace and manage. Mid-year, we also added 3 positions to finance, and part of this had to do with preparing for succession planning with some longtime people who are thinking about retiring, and then also preparing for the ERP transition and backfilling those as well. I'll give you an example. Even the payroll manager, I think we've talked about that a subset of our workforce is actually still on manual time cards that get data entered. And so we've been pre-implementing what's called Time Clock Plus, and expect that to go live in September or October to automate all of that. That is the tool that will be integrated in the tool of recommendation with Anthology, so that we'll start solving some of those problems sooner rather than later, removing some of that risk and so on. In terms of technology, you may also recall that we used HERF funds, the CARES Act funds, for COVID relief to supply Wi-Fi access to students. We have 2,000 loaner devices that are available through the libraries that students use. We recognized that a number of them had internet access challenges that we wanted to solve, and so we used CARES Act fund, HERF fund, for those over the last couple of years. Now that we are exhausting that, it's our recommendation that we continue that service for students and absorb it into our operating budget. We also have, you've seen a number of board action items come through about our VMware and our VDI displays and conference rooms and all of the equipment that's necessary to make sort of the portable workplace for employees, for faculty, for students, and so on, that there's been a pretty significant investment there. And we've shared with you that we did a lot of that work under HERF, so we were fortunate to have those funds, but now there is an ongoing cost associated with that. We're also adding e-discovery tools, which is a way for us to have software and services that will help us deal with public information requests and legal searches and HR searches and those kinds of things, and remove some of the labor intensity of how that's happening today and automate those processes. And then finally, there's a number of contract support areas where as we continue to have gaps in expertise here or need targeted expertise, maybe not in full-time positions, we've got some needs with Microsoft, Cisco, and colleague that we're adding in. I will share with you in terms of technology, there's 2 more things that we'll probably visit with you about in October. One is a security plan and camera replacement. The camera system across the college needs some attention. However, we feel like we need to step back and have a little bit more diligence about how we plan that equipment, how we plan building access and other aspects of security for us to have a comprehensive proposal for you all, and make sure that we're spending our money well, and also planning for even policy updates about how do we use data that you collect from all of those things. So there's a variety of things that we think that we can add some order to that will come back to you in October, and that would be a one-time expense that we could do from the excess fund balance. And then some of the disaster recovery equipment support that we'll bring back to you as well. So there have been a few organizational structures in addition to the ones I've alluded to already, and the Analytics and Planning Division is one that we're co-locating different functions that exist into a cohesive team, because we think there's some synergies behind the ways that they can operate. So that's institutional research that gathers all the data, including that enrollment data that you just saw, and helps us synthesize that. Institutional effectiveness, which has to do with our accreditation. Grants, which can be strategic as we find outside funding to pursue different initiatives. And then the organizational excellence and development that I mentioned a moment ago in terms of being strategic about how we guide our organization. But I don't know, if Dr. LeBlanc, if you want to add anything to that. Okay. We also created district divisions for faculty affairs and student affairs so that we've got sort of some district cohesion around how that operates across the college. And then finally, as we talked about extensively with the ERP project, we've got a number of positions that are going to be full-time assigned to the project, which is a best practice to make sure that we're managing and effectively implementing the system. We've memorialized those positions in Fund 10, but we will transfer the cost of those to our separate project that we've set up as well to keep track of how that works. But you'll see it reflected in the budget. So you may wonder how we're able to absorb these new costs. So I wanted to visit with you a little bit about some of the practices that we've had. We've been budgeting conservatively for a while because there's been sort of a sea change in the organization that 5 years ago didn't exist. So, for example, all of the debt service dollars that we had, we knew that there were a number of places that needed attention here as well. So we've included that. We've eliminated some of the I would say slack or cushion in some of the areas. Every year we've had an operating contingency line that sort of collected as we knew that we were going to need to make decisions throughout the year, the strategic priorities I mentioned. We also have consistently had savings and contributions to fund balance surrounding adjunct faculty pay pools, just because they've been budgeted more extensively than is required by the workload. And then also there's been there's a historical spending for some of the benefit costs that we can also make adjustments as well. And then finally, we do have added revenue associated with property tax and tuition, as we've talked about. So to walk you, are there any questions about Fund 10 before we move on from that?
Could you recap what the actual total increase is in Fund 10?
Yes, let's flip back to
Is
that
that-
side. It is right here. So
Go back to,
that's right. So the
Yeah.
total budgetary increase is $12 million in Fund 10.
okay. And more than half of that is primarily related to our debt service? No?
So, no, this is outside of debt service. So this is our
Oh,
budget
right,
after having
okay.
made the
Yeah.
transfer. So it's the position increases primarily in the reorganization there. And the other thing, I feel like I somehow deleted a slide, but we also have a number of positions we've memorialized from the discussions we've been having around on-calls, as well as the admin and coordinator needs across the campuses that we've right-sized the staffing there that we have rolled out that's resulted in some position increases as well that I've missed in here, but primarily staffing and equipment and so on.
Okay. Any questions? Bill? Dr. Morrison? Okay.
Okay, so moving on to the auxiliary fund. So as I pointed out a minute ago, this is sort of a fund that collects a variety of things, and I've organized this in such a way that it'll make sense, I hope, in just a minute. I started at the top with food service, that is a pure revenue for us related to a concession that is paid by the food service vendors, the ones that manage the vending machines, the one that manage the new genuine food services that are on the campuses, the catering that comes through as well, that we get a percentage of that as a college. There's also testing centers on each campus where most of them are pass-throughs, where we charge a fee and then pay the expense. However, there is a slight revenue to the college based on a lot of our professional testing that we do actually collect a fee associated with that. The bookstore, you'll notice it's got a slight net positive, but those are fees that essentially students are billed by us for some of their digital coursework and that kind of course materials and those kinds of things from Barnes & Noble, and then we pay the invoices to Barnes & Noble, so it's primarily a pass-through. In the middle section are things that are purely a pass-through. So the professional pilot program, they pay for their flight hours and so on, and then we pay the vendors that provide those services. The child care center shifts the balance a little bit of a different direction. So we get $250,000 or so in revenue there, but our expenditures are about $420,000. So it's consciously subsidized from non-taxpayer and non-tuition dollars in this fund, but it's also important and appropriate because of the teaching activities that occur in that program on the Northeast campus. Then moving right along, you'll see that we've got an accumulated fund balance that we show there that we plan to use of $2.2 million, and these are pure subsidies for different activities that we do. So there's faculty and staff development and engagement. This includes our tuition reimbursement program, their dependent tuition reimbursement program, different events and things that we do for faculty and staff. Community engagement includes a lot of the events that we attend with chambers and things like that that we participate in. The student success and engagement captures our partnership with Catholic Charities as an example. It also includes some book scholarships and things like that. And then finally, the Easy Ride program, with which you're very familiar, that subsidizes the bus passes for our students to be able to have free access. This is important because these are all things that are values of the college, but they occur outside of tax dollars and tuition dollars and so on. Your question?
Thank you for pointing out the Child Care Center. Are there other expenditures related to the instructional portion of the Child Care Center that are not represented on this slide?
Yes. So, So this has to do with the fees that you take in from parents and the cost there. The faculty, I believe, are captured in just our regular operating budget.
Really, the faculty, the facilities, expenses, all of that is like all the regular programs, and this is just the cost of managing the child care center, the food and et cetera.
How does this differ from the current year?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me to point that out. So we've changed the total amount, and the only line that has changed is the bookstore line. We've added $750,000, and that is based solely on the experience they have this year of actual revenue and expenses. And so it's, again, a pass-through, but we've increased both the overall revenue and overall expenditures in the bookstore line item by $750,000. There's a little footnote down at the bottom.
Does community engagement include the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce?
I'm going to have to look to Reg. I think this is primarily where we buy tables and things like that, and
That would be on the institutional membership.
in our Fund 10, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the use of auxiliary fund, use of prior balance.
Yes, so
Have
it's
we
accrued,
done-
there's about $20 million in
Okay.
accrued fund balance in the auxiliary fund. So from all of these sources that have built up over time.
Okay,
And
so
so
we're
that's
drawing
correct.
that down.
That's
And
correct.
We did that in the current year?
We did for the
Okay.
same amount.
Okay.
Although I will tell you that our expenditures on some of the activities didn't require that much of a fund balance usage, but we did plan for that amount this year.
Okay.
Okay, and so then Fund 45 is our ERP project, and so and I believe it was May that you all authorized the transfer of $88 million from the Fund 10 fund balance to this project for us to be able to track the expenditures. What we will do each year is appropriate a specific portion of that fund balance within this project to reflect our anticipated costs for the year. So we have it budgeted at about $3 million in employee costs for the ones who are assigned to the project, as well as operating costs of our anthology implementation services, as well as the license agreement and other third-party contractors that we anticipate to be billed this year. It's a 3-year project, well, really 40 months when you include the stabilization period. Debt service, and so this gives you a little bit of an understanding. So in fiscal year 2022, we had just under $18 million in debt service, and you can see the INS rate associated with that was under a penny. Flash forward to fiscal year 23 with the sale that we just did in June, and we're increasing it by $28 million to a total of $46.5 million. And so I've got the correlating tax rate increase noted there. Let me rephrase that. Shifting of the tax rate from O&M to INS, not a tax rate increase. Okay, and so in terms of the pay-as-you-go capital, we do have a plan by campus of cash flow needed for these projects. In September, we are going to come back to you and present the results of the facility condition assessment, the master plan that you've already seen previews of, and the 5-year capital plan that will marry up the cash-funded capital with the bond-funded capital and how that looks over time, and be more explicit about what all of those projects are. But what you'll note is that in fiscal year '22, we had planned about $16 million in expenses, and, but each year we transfer over $24 million from Fund 10. And the intent there is to make a consistent contribution to this fund and accumulate a fund balance for us to plan for the cash needs that are going to be needed over time. We actually had less spending this year. We've only spent about $7.7 million out of the cash funded, and part of that is because of the pause we put on some of the other campuses, particularly with the MEP program and some of the 3GAP activities and other things that were that we needed to pause and look at, that we wanted to wait and make sure that we were being strategic about the spending of those things. So you'll note that at the end of this fiscal year, we're anticipating a fund balance of about $59 million. Our plan for next year is again to make that transfer. It's that middle column of $24 million as planned. And we plan to spend about, we'll use about $31 million of the accumulated fund balance for a total spending plan of $55 million. Part of the reason for that big jump next year is we're hitting sort of our stride with a lot of the projects that are underway, plus what you've seen with some of the inflationary factors and the planning that we've been doing in the bond program. We've been supplementing with cash where appropriate based on the purpose of the expenditures as we've been moving along. So you'll see that starts to accelerate that based on where we are on the capital program. We will go into much more detail about this and have an exhibit that helps you understand that more fully at our September meeting.
The number in the change column for use of funds should not be 22,873,000. That's a negative. It's a minus in the FY 2022 column.
So you're right. I'll have to go back and look at that.
Okay.
I will not do math at the microphone right now, but I will.
That's,
But let me go back and look at that and see how we clean that up. I changed this around sort of at the last minute, trying to figure out how to make it more understandable, and
but
may not have
I think the
succeeded.
totals are probably correct. The
Yeah.
39,352 is
Yeah.
just, they don't
That's
add
right.
up to that.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Okay, so on the bond capital.
I just wanted you to know I was following.
I
you.
appreciate it. I need you guys to get out your calculators during this. Make me nervous. Okay, so then the bond capital program, again, in fiscal year '22, we had planned about $133 million of expenditures. Next year, we're planning about $149. You've seen on our program website how we show over time what that cash flow is going to look like based on everything that's in play. You can see our fund balance at the beginning of the year was $209 million. We're actually only probably cash out the door, only about $91 million this fiscal year, just the timing of when the expenses occur and that kind of thing. Plus, we've got the deposit that we had of the recent sale. So you can see we've got a substantial fund balance there for this purpose. So as I've alluded to, our next steps for the capital plan is we'll have a robust discussion in September. And the goal is to start having a publishable 5-year capital plan that adds a whole lot of clarity around what projects are actually happening over time. As you know, the first year will be pretty tight. We know exactly what we're doing next year. And then we'll have the projections going out that we'll continue to fine-tune and update each year with you. So in terms of the process, so on Thursday, you have your normal work session. And so we will there's 2 resolutions that are in your packet. And I will tell you, I'm going to sub these out because we had some discussions about interest accruals and things like that I'll get those to you. But you've got one associated with the budget, which we will provide you with any feedback that you have for us today if we need to make any adjustments. And then we also have the proposed tax rate resolution. This is a 2-step process now that started a couple of years ago. We will be posting a variety of information on our website. As you can see, that we'll have to, the report that we have on the no new revenue rate, that our debt, and so on, that is required under the law. Then at our regular board meeting, we will ask you to adopt a proposed tax levy. And it requires 60% to approve. And then what we do at that point is and you'll also adopt the budget at that same meeting, since our fiscal year starts on September the 1st. But the tax levy, the proposed rate will be published in the newspaper. You may remember that we actually report how each member voted, which is required by law. There is a confusing thing, since we are recommending that we adopt a rate that is above the no new revenue rate. I've highlighted the language that applies to us, so it differs depending on what rate you adopt. But it actually requires us to say, even though it's not accurate, that the rate will raise the tax rate, which is, again, we've all talked about how nonsensical that is, but we are not raising the tax rate. However, this is the language that's required because we're adopting above that no new revenue rate. And then what will happen in September is we will advertise 5 days in advance of that, a public hearing, and then you'll be able to adopt the tax levy. We have to do it by September the 19th. You're required to do it within 60 days of when you receive the tax roll.
I have some clarifying questions.
Sure.
So the requirement for 60% of the board,
That's right.
that's interesting. That's just new. So 4.2 people, so five
Which
board
translates
members.
into 5, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. See, I was doing math too. And then could you explain one more time that portion that you have highlighted?
Yes, so we are recommending a rate that is above the no new revenue rate. The no new revenue rate assumes on properties that were taxed last year that a lower rate would be required to collect the same amount of money on those because of the increased values. Because we are recommending a rate above that, we actually have to run an ad that says that the rate will raise the tax rate, even though it does not, even if the tax rate stays the same. So I think that they may have intended to say raise the tax revenue. I don't know but the language is unclear. This was a so-called transparency bill that to me is not added transparency. And we did this last year. So last year was I believe the first year that we did this.
Bottom line is, we're not increasing the tax.
That is correct.
Proposal is to not increase the tax rate.
That is correct.
So Susan, we've had the same tax rate for several years.
We have.
Even though the revenue has increased, and we have had to post in the newspaper this very statement
Yes.
before.
That very statement was in there
Yeah.
the year before last. I guess we've done it 2 years. And the year before last, we adopted above the no new revenue rate as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess I would just emphasize again, too, that we had lowered the tax rate, or the college had, for 5-6 years running, until they began preparing for the bond program and recognizing that we had no debt service allocation. So again, within the existing tax rate at the time, we've been able to absorb an $825 million program, which is pretty remarkable, and a pretty low impact to the average homeowner.
Any questions?
Of course, there's the market for faculty is difficult right now for a lot of institutions. You say 4% increase for faculty, is that correct?
Faculty and staff.
The faculty
Yeah,
and
with the
staff.
exceptions of some of the highest
So do you think that
paid.
is competitive with other institutions like ours, and will help us to retain and/or increase faculty?
So we probably should share with them at the work session the comparison with other
Okay.
like colleges. So the salary increases range from 3% to 5%. Keep in mind that several of the other community colleges, including our neighbors, let go several employees during the pandemic, and we did not. So it seemed, if I recall correctly, Dallas let go of about 400 employees during the pandemic. And we were able to keep our employees. We had to make adjustments, and we've been more strategic. We've been more intentional about where we place the employees so that we can fully utilize that resource. However, we didn't have to let anyone go. So that's important to share, I think, and we will make sure of that. And then, Susan, for each percentage that we increase, that's not quite an additional $2 million, but we need to give them that information as well.
That's right. If you calculate the entire payroll as if each position was filled and eligible, it's about $1.9 million. We budget slightly less than that because that's not realistic to assume it would apply to those, and so that's why we're assuming about $6.5 million. The one thing I will share is that with faculty, we've done some comparisons with other colleges about comparative pay, and we think we're positioned pretty well, and that the 4% is appropriate there, although we'll continue to study it. The trickier thing is the staff, just because of some of the challenges with the current classifications and titling and where people were placed when they arrived and all of those kinds of things. The 4% will be a great start in the right direction, and again, we're preserving enough room that as we study that system and make some decisions about how to modify that, focused on retention and recruitment, that we've got the dollars able to do that. Across the boards are a little tricky just because not every job classification has the same market pressures as others or the same retention pressures as others, right? So we need to do a little bit more of a surgical look at that with this study, and then be prepared to have resources to commit to make those adjustments.
So what is the increase for the Board of Trustees? Kidding.
Maybe 25% of nothing is nothing, right? Yeah, perfect, yeah.
I have a question
Dr. Morrison?
related to the salary study. Is it possible that a person would enjoy both the across-the-board salary increase as well as the salary scale adjustment?
Yes, so this will apply to all those who are eligible today. In addition, as we adjust the pay scale up, there are some people who may even receive more to get to the bottom of the pay range as well. So those two things will happen with this budget. As we study the positions later and make decisions about what the appropriate market comparison is by classification, we'll make some decisions and bring to the board a discussion about our philosophy about where we want to be in the market and what that might cost and how to deal with the equity with the people assigned to any given job classification. So, but the point being that yes, people will be eligible for that as well, depending on their classification as we make progress.
So I don't imagine you'll have all those figures in place by September 1.
Oh, no.
So are those likely to be retroactive to the budget year for employees?
So what I would say is that we've got a lot more homework to do before we can even make a sound recommendation around that. Because what'll happen is we'll, as we correct the anomalies of the structure and make some sense even between the pay grades, mathematically how they're distributed, make decisions about how wide the ranges ought to be and so on. We will study what the impact is of making a variety of different adjustments to people and bring that back to you with a price tag and seek board approval about how we implement that. Anything in terms of retroactive it'll take us the next year working on all of that, to be honest with you. It's a very complex effort.
So you may have said what's the timing on that study?
So it'll take us the better part of a year. We've
Okay.
Closed the RFP. We didn't have as many responses as I had hoped, so I'm still hopeful that we'll get to a conclusion where we are able to pick a firm and bring it to you in September for approval. And then one of the things that I definitely want to do is be tactical about how to break it into manageable parts. I think that's one of the challenges that the college faced when they tried to do this a number of years ago, is that they sort of tackled the entire thing, and I think that we need to figure out how to manage that. An example of that is the work that I mentioned already that we've done with the admin assistants and the coordinators on campuses. We've already got market data around them. We've normalized the job classifications. We're meeting with them tomorrow to also talk about how we're going to be migrating people into those. And we're going to be positioned well to look at those in terms of what does that mean from a market perspective for those positions sooner than some of the others. So it'll be a little bit incremental for that reason.
Could you, in regard to Fund 10 retention, we're going to plus 31, $2 million. What does this entail?
It's adding advisors and success coaches and career advisors to the campuses, and so expanding the cadre of people that are able to.
This is a significant expansion?
It is. Mm-hmm. It is. And I don't have a percentage. Dr. LeBlanc may.
It's a significant expansion based on recommendations that have been made in the last 2 years. And technically, some of these positions were approved, but were put on hold.
Yeah.
And so we're just moving on it, basically, moving on decisions that had been made. So this is a significant sea change, and it's linked to what we call the persistence model. So there are 4 different categories under the persistence model. You start with the recruitment and onboarding of students, and you go through the whole process until completion when they're finished with a degree or transferred to the next university. So it's really excellent work that's been taking place really over 5 years, and we're finally at a point where we're able to operationalize, which is really exciting.
Does this include, many of us, as we've said before, get calls about registration? Does this, getting the students
We're
in line?
moving on that, and of course, she's smiling because she keeps saying that anthology is going to
anthology,
fix the
I
technical
understand.
piece of registration. In the meantime, we do have teams of people that are supporting our students, starting with phone calls to people that make sure that they're okay, that they're registering like they're supposed to, and so on, which we did not do before. So when you look at the enrollments, she mentioned the date, and that's important because each day we add about 200 more students, and we still have this week and next for students to have the opportunity to register. So the effort is paying off. The results we want are to be able to cast a wider net in serving our students and actually getting them to finish, to completion. And we're doing quite well. But we do need to be more strategic, and we need to have the resources to make it happen.
The number of recommended positions also are based on best practices around ratio of students to advising staff so that they can get that down to a more manageable and proactive level.
Also, another question I have is in regard to security plan and camera replacement. Of course, there have been some difficulties in a lot of places. Is there any analysis going on in regard to increasing the security of our campuses, or are we already got what is necessary? Nothing in particular.
Sure.
I'm just interested because the public is interested in that.
Sure. So we will be having some conversation with you all on Thursday in closed session about our security planning, just based on some of the things that are happening around the country that we want to make sure that you're comfortable, we're prepared for. In terms of this effort that we'll bring back to you, again, we think a more orderly approach around making sure that we're deploying technology appropriately to aid in how we manage our security planning is what we're after. We know that we've got a number of cameras that are out of commission and those kinds of things, and we need to make some decisions about how we're going to improve that and use technology for security purposes.
I have a couple of comments. And the first one was around the issue of health and safety. I think that's an issue that most people are probably tired of hearing about, but it's one that we cannot not be attentive to. And so I would like to have that addressed from several points of view. One being, this is highly personal opinion, but I'm privileged to share it, that I believe it's our responsibility to continue to make available preventive factors that have proven to work in containing the COVID pandemic. That being masks, sanitizing stations, and other signs reminding people to practice safe practices. Even in spite of that, some of us who think we were extremely careful have fallen of recurring illnesses. So I think we have to be attentive to that. It's not a requirement for people, but the presence of those resources would be important. I was disappointed today when I came in that I didn't, when I walked into the front pavilion, there was nothing. And that's disappointing. And I want to ask the people who've made that decision to reconsider that. Secondly, the safety issue that needs to be addressed not only with students and faculty, but visitors that come to our campus. And I hope it's not a situation like it was when I was on the campus of Stephen F. Austin years ago when the Upward People concerts came to campus. And I was amazed that everybody on stage had a microphone. The director said, well, everybody has a microphone, but everybody's mic is not on. So I'm hoping that everywhere there's a camera, that it's on and it's working and it's monitored. And I think that is something that we have to be extremely diligent about and unapologetic. Anybody that's been in a public school, and I've been in many over the course of my years, know that there's always at least one locked door in every building that people can go in and out of, because there is this lockdown theory that teachers shouldn't have access to leave campus or to have personal issues or go to their cars and things, and we know that's insanity. So what that does is causes a breach of protocol. And I know that we don't have that mentality, but I just think we have to be aware of those kinds of glitches and be attentive to those. And so I don't have to know what the plans are in health and, health and safety, but I certainly want to know that there are highly paid, competent professionals on our staff that are paying strict attention to them, that are monitoring them daily, and that are making certain that they're there and in place. And so I'm just asking a review of that, and that be included. It is not an also in the budget, it is a priority, because if there is no health and safety, there cannot be continual learning. And so I just want to ask you to revisit that from every aspect. Those of us who sit in this room might not know what needs to be put in place, but I bet somebody on our staff does. And if nobody knows, then that's an opportunity for us to bring some more smart people on.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I have one question and one comment. Is there, I know I'm asking for something pretty crazy. Is there a summary slide that in more detail than the one that is on page, oh my gosh, I can't even read, 8, the comparative funds, the current fiscal year and the upcoming fiscal year?
Yeah, so can you elaborate a little bit on the additional detail that you'd like to see?
Well, as applicable funds 10 all the way through 90, expenditures and revenue. Comparison over fiscal year.
Oh, I got it.
Does
Okay.
that make
Yeah.
sense?
So we did that for 10, but you're suggesting that the other funds, you'd like to see that as well?
Just
Absolutely.
as a once over glance at how things have changed
Yeah.
for the college
Okay.
year over year. And then my comment is, and I appreciate you bringing attention to the detail on how the facility assessment and the master plan will better inform the budget for pay-as-you-go as we move forward. I just think that it's very important that as we continue to move forward with our bond program, that we are transparent about the total cost and the total investment, because I think that there's a good news story in that as well, for capturing what that expense is and for capturing those improvements as they kind of blend into each other.
Agreed.
If that makes sense.
It does. And my goal is certainly to, in a singular document, display the interplay of the funding sources. Because at the end of the day, I mean, people care about the funding source, but at the end of the day, I mean, you need to see how it's knit together. So that's what the goal is with what the 5-year capital plan will look like.
I have just one more kind of general comment that it's as with, it's kind of personal too, but there's a lot of talk about mental health in schools and in public schools and universities and law schools and so forth. Our friend Tom Harris is, the Jordan E. Harris Foundation has what's called Hope Squads to recognize students who may be having some mental health. Do we have some health awareness program in our college? You get it, what I'm trying to say?
I'm looking to Dr. LeBlanc if she wants to elaborate today or bring more
Okay,
information back.
I just want to make sure.
We
Mental,
do.
there's been a lot of mental stress going on during these days, and
We do, and so we depend greatly on human resources and some of their staff to follow up on anything that we may be concerned about. But we do have an employee assistance program that is free to all of our employees, and if somebody is under tremendous stress and so on, we can guide them and advise them on those services. We can't make them go for help, but we can certainly inform them of that. And we have done that actually in recent months. So we do have a system in place to help people. We've also announced it. We have these leadership series that we started a few months ago, and one of those included information for employees on the employee assistance program, what is available, and how they can seek help with no one else learning about it. You know, I think sometimes people are concerned that their supervisor might learn about it and hold it against them or whatever. That wouldn't happen. However, we assure them that all of that is confidential.
thank you.
Okay, so, anyone else? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so on Thursday, I'll bring back a couple of responses to some of the questions in the summary pages and things like that. And if you think of anything else that you would like between now and Thursday, just let us know, and we'd be happy to prepare that. And then we've got another full week before any action is required.
Well, it's obvious that this budget takes a lot of work. I think we all appreciate the time you've spent explaining it to us today. I agree with Ms. DeKine that it'd be helpful to have a side-by-side comparison, just so we see a little more about where the shifts are.
Absolutely.
But thank you, and for everybody
And
that's
the
worked
staff
on this.
on our team.
Appreciate,
Lots of people worked really hard on it, so.
This is a very clear, and I like the way you start with the big picture and then drill down through the various parts of it. So, good presentation. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr.
So
LeBlanc?
we learn something new every time we have a presentation like this, and the questions are very helpful. One thing that's been brought to our attention over time was the transparency related to the expenses connected to the bond. And we have a dashboard. We haven't given that presentation to the board yet, but the dashboard is on our website.
That's correct, and we've actually improved that even more. We've had the dashboard for a while, but there's now going to be direct links to the board action items so that you can link all that together. We will have that demonstrated at Thursday's work session for you.
I'm really excited about this. I really am.
Yes, because you've mentioned it a few times, and so we focused on that piece. I do appreciate Susan and her team. They've been, it's an organization this size. Engaging the different stakeholders is very time consuming. And we are always saying we're going to start a little bit earlier, but it doesn't matter how early you start. You still end up with a lot of effort and a lot of work right down to the deadline. So I appreciate all of their efforts. And again, we appreciate your willingness to be here and ability to be here and give us feedback, because it's a team effort. So thank you very much.
Let me also acknowledge and thank the various campus presidents for being here with us and sitting quietly during this presentation. Hope you feel like your input earlier in the process has been heard.
All 6 of the campus presidents.
Yes, all 6 of them are
Thank
here.
you.
Appreciate your being here. If there are no further comments, then...
Oh, I had a comment.
yeah, well, okay.
You
get
knew that I would. Dr. LeBlanc reminded me, because she knows me very well after many years of our association. She talked about the teams that are reaching out to help with enrollment, and for new students and returning students. And certainly one very key aspect of that is the faculty. And I wanted to thank the JCC chair-elect for being here, and the other members who not only are here, but for participating in this whole budget process, but also in the running of the campuses. You know that I have an advocacy for the faculty, as well as staff, because I've been in all those different positions, so I know they're all very important. And so I just want to thank you all for taking the gusto that you have and bringing it to this challenge and this opportunity that we have to increase our enrollment and to share this great benefit that we have with more people across Tarrant County and across the world. So thanks, and thank you, Dr. LeBlanc, for welcoming all talents to the table.
Anyone else have comments? If not, unless there's an objection, we'll stand adjourned.